Just imagine this. You're hearing whisperings of a game where anything is possible. A game in which the world is so vast and almost endless that surely it shouldn't exist. But it did. This was World of Warcraft in the vanilla era, the original era. Let's zoom back to 2004, an era in which Eddie Guerrero was still around and had just become the WWE champion, stealing the belt from Brock Lesnar. An era in which the first Halo was still dominating, with the sequel soon to be released, which would go on to dominate sales records. An era in which MySpace had become the first proper social media platform, allowing millions of people to communicate and express themselves with their own profiles. It was even an era that spawned one of the most defining TV shows of all time, Lost, which went on to change serialised TV series forever. Yes, this was 2004, an era of constantly innovating, changing and meta-shifting cultural processes, and within that melting pot spawned some of the best ideas that would ever be conceived, one of which was World of Warcraft, which went on to launch on the 23rd of November 2004. I would like to add, however, I didn't start playing until 5 months after launch. I believe it was April 2005 to be precise. But I was already familiar with Blizzard games such as the Warcraft RTS series, mainly Warcraft 3, and was also heavily addicted to Diablo 2, playing for hours a day trying to farm rare runes to craft my Enigma armor. Blizzard at the time was revered in the games industry, and it was hard not to be after having such a string of successful games and franchises. You could tell they were still a product of passion, rather than part of a much larger corporate machine which we now see today. Basically, there were a bunch of nerds who loved fantasy, and clearly wanted to create amazing worlds for us to live out our dreams within. But beyond this, I was just a teenager, and I didn't know that this game that I'd just booted up for the first time was going to inadvertently change nearly everything in my life, and still does to this day. I mean, just browsing all the different races, which looking back on was rather limited in terms of customization, but I was just in awe. It's like all the little lights in my brain had just switched on, all the synapses were firing and my heart was thumping with excitement. Should I pick this big hulking bull man, or perhaps go for a more stealthy looking night elf? No, the obvious choice was a dwarf paladin. I mean, all of the races had their own mystique and charm to them, and as a teenager, it felt like it would have taken an eternity to explore all of the lore, story and background. I mean, I didn't even end up getting the dwarf paladin to level 60. My first level 60 ended up being a night elf warrior, which was one of the most challenging experiences of my life at that point, which most people can attest to if they ever leveled a warrior back then. And just to step back, saying this all out loud during 2025 probably seems trivial, but this entire free and open fantasy world was game breaking for the time. It's something that shouldn't have existed. It felt impossible, but there it was, changing all of our lives. And don't get me started on the music. I have some really fond memories and often painful nostalgia when thinking back to the Night Elf starting zone with that haunting ethereal music. One of sorrow, aged musty air and infinite possibilities. My little brain was in a stimulation overload, like it had just been injected with life itself. In fact, what's even more mind-blown is known now that they were actually working on this game from around 1999, which during that time, no console had access to the internet except for the just-launched Sega Dreamcast. Basically, World of Warcraft was era-defining, not just as an MMO or even as a fantasy game, but just as a game that completely led the way into new ground. In fact, in the UK, where I'm based, we'd only just broken out of dial-up internet speeds in 2004, and most of the world probably didn't even have internet infrastructure in place. This just goes to show how much Blizzard really believed in their vision, that they would take such a gamble by releasing an online subscription-based game, when half the world couldn't even access the internet at the time. It was a bet on the future and where the world was going. I spent most of my waking hours in-game. The only trouble was we only had one family computer at the time, and having an older brother meant that I had to compete for game time, as he was also just getting into WoW. He played an Orc Hunter on Stormreaver EU, which eventually migrated to Mazragos. Because of this conflict in gaming hours, it meant I had to skip any form of raiding, and usually just ended up doing dungeons on the night or PvPing outside of Ironforge. At the time, I was playing on Ragnaros EU as a Night Elf warrior. Because I was younger than my brother and still in school at the time, this conflict of not being able to play during decent hours meant that I started getting frustrated and often playing way later than I should have. I'd stay up all night, often to 2 or 3 in the morning, trying to gear up when I could. This is how influential this game felt to me and probably many others. My schoolwork started to suffer, but nothing had ever felt as good as this. WoW allowed me and many others to express ourselves and feel successful in a way that simply wasn't possible in real life. Well, especially not as a teenager. But it wasn't all bad. I made some real good friends at the time, and many of my friends from school were also playing, telling me about what loot they'd gotten or what class they were going to roll next. I'd argue that WoW was probably more influential than Pokemon, though maybe not as big a cultural phenomenon in terms of such a wide audience appeal. But what I could see was that it was really shaping people's personalities and that their characters felt like an extension of themselves. I think when you compare it to today's viral games like Roblox, Fortnite or Minecraft, it felt way more groundbreaking because it was the first proper look at what was possible through internet-based gaming. It connected everybody, shaped culture, and felt like the things you were doing mattered. It was truly a phenomenon, and when you put that into context that nothing has come close to replacing it even after 20 years, 2 decades later, then you really get a sense of what we were all going through at the time. It's totally crazy. This game goes back as far as 1999. Just saying that out loud makes me want to shed tears. I was only 9 back then. I'm 34 now. And I was likely still playing Pokemon Red at the time and arguing with friends on the playground about what Pokemon shinies we could swap for or what we managed to get in the card packs. We were always hoping for Charizard, of course. WoW has covered more than 50% of my lifespan at this point, and it will only grow forevermore. I'm entwined with WoW, and WoW with me. And don't get me started on the raiding scene in WoW. The people who were capable of downing bosses like Ragnaros or Onyxia were seen as literal gods in World of Warcraft. I'd often stand beside them in Ironforge, casually idling, but constantly inspecting them to see what I might be able to get in the future. Looking back, it was a pipe dream without being able to raid during normal hours, but it still didn't stop me dreaming. It wasn't always about the prestige of items though. Even some of the most basic interactions like talking shit in Baron's chat on my Horde character was absolutely hilarious and often had me in kinks for hours. This evolved as well, mainly because everybody was locked to set servers without phasing at the time. So people you would see in chat or in the game world were people you'd see over and over again, and you'd develop a sort of loose relationship with them that grew as the server progressed. It was more than a game, it felt like a second home at times, and I can speak to this from a personal level because I'd often have falling outs with my friends who'd sometimes exclude me from the group, and this made me feel lonely. WoW was always there though, as that comfort blanket and place where I could be someone else. I did have some other friends though, who ultimately have become my lifelong friends. They were the nerdy group who were always talking about games. I have fond memories of this, and most of our time in IT class was spent goofing off browsing the WoW forums to see what people were talking about or if we'd missed anything interesting going on. WoW even seemed to follow me on holiday. I'm from the UK, but I have family in Athens, in Greece, and the great thing about Athens, even to this day, is they have some of the best LAN centres to play in. I remember running around PvPing and having fellow LAN gamers hovering over my shoulder, asking me questions and looking to see what I was up to. The phenomenon was worldwide, seemingly. I think what's more devastating for me reflecting on it all is that I had tons of screenshots that I used to take of seemingly arbitrary things, and over time I ended up losing those memories because I'd end up replacing my hard drive. I guess when you're in the moment, you don't realise how special those memories are, but I suppose that's what gives memories gravity and makes them feel more beautiful. I do think I wouldn't be the same person I am had I not played WoW. It really shaped the person I've become in ways that would be impossible to quantify because I've spent so long in that game. It started with minor cultural things like doing the dances from WoW that each race had, to more intricate things like figuring out how to interact properly and politely with other players, and sometimes, when trolling, how to push other people's buttons. Cultural moments in WoW were very strong, especially throughout the early eras. This shaped people psychologically and often spilled over into real life with the things that people wore, or even what they had in their room, like certain collectibles. And this only went on to grow over time, especially as WoW approached its peak during Wrath of the Lich King. You had celebrities doing advertisements, Mountain Dew doing sponsored offerings and promotions, and WoW was starting to build a name for itself in competitive circles. But really, vanilla is where it all started. And this was before peak hype, back when information was hard to come by, and the game was still an unravelling mystery. Vanilla, for me, wasn't just a game, and for many others. It was a mystery, a home, and a moment in time that none of us will ever get back, but all of us will always carry. Thank you for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed my story. Please like, subscribe and share so that I can keep coming back to you with weekly content with my thoughts, my views and general overviews on World of Warcraft and how it continues to evolve and grow into something beautiful. Thank you.